thought the Cobra Aerojet irons were the best game improvement irons released last year. So can the new Darkspeeds beat them? Let's go find out. Well, for one, they're definitely more attractive. Although I loved the performance of the Aerojets last year, they weren't necessarily the best looking iron. And I do think like this darker finish has really helped with that. And also they've just kind of tidied up this whole back and given it a little bit of a sleeker look. It definitely kind of has these two accents to it, which is a bit more like it has that kind of blade structure to it, and it just has a little bit more of a traditional feel. Now obviously this is a game improvement club, so it is a bit bigger than say a player's model that I might normally typically use, but actually we've got two tones on the top line to try and make it look a little bit slimmer. And what I like about these is the offset isn't too aggressive, so there is a little bit there that's going to help square the face up a little bit, but it's not really drastic. All right, I'm starting this out by hitting 5 iron, which is pretty brutal. We've got 185 to the green from here. So let's see if we can get there. That was really solid. It's literally pin high. What I really like is like the height on the shot. I find for me like 5 iron's kind of the point in the set where it gets a little bit sticky, like it just feels a little bit harder to hit than the 6 iron. It's not quite as comfortable. But actually something like this, giving you a really easy height, is such a big way to gain distance for most people, but also just to be able to gain consistency because you can actually hold the ball on a green. It's obviously pretty important. Now, a lot of game improvement clubs can be pretty draw biased in nature, which is great if you're someone who needs to square the club face up, but it does kind of take a section of the market out. And there's a lot of players who don't necessarily need that draw bias help. I think that's where these are really good. Like across the board, through my testing, what I've seen is they're pretty neutral down the target line, which I actually really like because I think it just opens it up to a broader range of people. And actually, it gives you the recognition to learn to square your face up rather than just relying on the club a little bit. Now, in terms of distance, these have been really impressive. I've tested them inside, in a swing room, and it's looking like my average is about the 182, 183 mark, which is definitely a good 10 yards longer than what I would typically get out like my 5 iron. Some shots were getting up into the 190s, which is like insane. That's like 3 hybrid length. So if you're in the market for distance, these are good options. I'd say that's pretty consistent with what we saw last year. They were still really fast models. There's probably a little bit extra distance in these, but I wouldn't say massive. Obviously it's only year to year, so you're probably getting an extra couple of yards on average. Now, Cobra's big tech in here is something called PowerShell. This is an insert which is inside the club head, and while it's been there before, it's been made 21% larger this year, which is just increasing that sweet spot, making it more forgiving. And I think what I've seen is that's really come up in the consistency and the dispersion. It's been really good, really neutral down the target line, and just feels really easy to hit. And in terms of dispersion, that's where I've seen the biggest difference from this year to last. It's been a lot more consistent. And what I also like is the launch and the flight has been consistent too. So it feels like you know what's going to happen, which makes it a lot easier to control into the greens. Okay, I've dropped down to 7 iron. And weirdly, in terms of shaping, like they're still very similar. It feels like this has a lot longer blade length almost in comparison to the 5. Like the 5 felt fairly small in terms of length of blade for a game improvement club, whereas this looks a bit bigger. Now, what's been really interesting when testing this is looking at the height of the shot. I think a lot of people might perceive that maybe your 5 iron flies lower than your 9 iron, but actually that shouldn't be the case. You should have the same peak height across all your clubs. And with this, across the 9, the 7 and the 5 when testing, there was less than a foot difference in terms of peak height. So it varied from 92.3 to 93.1 in terms of peak height, which is pretty insane. So although I would say you're getting a little bit less spin out of these than some irons, I think with the 5 iron I was averaging in the mid 3000s, with the 7 iron I'm averaging in the mid 5000s. You're making up for it by having a high ball flight consistently across the set. So that's going to give you that stopping power and get the ball to stop on the green, even if you don't necessarily have quite as much spin. Another ball on the green, always nice. I actually really like the feel of these too. Some game improvement clubs can feel a bit clicky, whereas these just feel, I wouldn't say they're soft, they don't feel like a player's iron, but they feel really solid and like consistently good through the shot. Now, some of the reason behind that might be there's actually foam inside this club head, which is designed to increase that sound and feel. Feels like it's working. I mean, I've hit 5 out of 6 shots on the green so far, so if you want to see consistency, I can't do much more. 9-iron time. Definitely a lot more compact and like rounded behind the ball actually, which is actually nicer. But obviously you can afford to do that in this club in terms of size and weighting. That was so good. It was like dead on line in the air. It looked like it was going in the hole. Sadly, it actually stopped pretty quick. Just shot the pin and didn't. So it shows you at least you're getting some stopping power. That's what I like about this, you're getting so much height, it stops really quickly on the greens. I think people always perceive game improvement irons like just be quick and like if they're just going to run through and not stop. It's just not the case at all. What I do think is a little bit interesting when you get down to this part of the bag is the gap in. So I was over 180 carry distance with my 5-iron, I was over 160 with my 7-iron, but with the 9-iron I was struggling to get to the 130 mark, which leaves a bit bigger gap ins. Now, I don't think this is that rare. I do see this a little bit when I'm testing game improvement irons, but that is quite a big gap in comparison, like over 30 yards compared to 20 yards between like 7 to 5. I don't know if that's because they've got a slightly thinner face this year, and obviously you've got a bigger face area on the 5 and the 7, so maybe they just flex a little bit more and they can give you more ball speed. But then again, I guess it's not a disaster, because if this went 10 yards further, how many wedges would you have to carry? So there is like a bit of a balance, but you kind of need to know there might be bigger gaps from like 9 to 8, wedge to 9, than there is at the top of the bag. What's also pretty good is, even when I'm not striking these out the middle, like that first one I nearly holed was quite toey. So there's a good amount of forgiveness in here. Oh, it's just so good. Just when you hit like towering shots like that with a 9-iron, you do just think like, why am I making it harder for myself by playing something else? Definitely makes me question my thinking. Now, as with last year's model, these are a really great game improvement iron. I've really enjoyed hitting them. Probably the outstanding factor is just the consistency, the height, the fact there is some level of control there, as well as the distance. And I do think these are up there contending again to be the best game improvement iron of the year. But you're gonna have to wait for the head-to-head to find out if they take the crown or not.